Welcome back to the Real News Network. I'm Jessica Devereaux, coming to you live from our studio in Baltimore. We're joined now by our in-studio panel to discuss the history of why exactly Baltimore is burning right now. That's sort of been a question that the media has been talking about. So joining us in studio is Marisela Gomez. She's a public health scholar, activist, and author. She's a Baltimorean community activist, so she really knows her stuff here in Baltimore. And joining us is Shaquayah McKenzie. She's a peace coordinator for Peace by Peace, which is an organization based in Baltimore. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you.
So Marisela, I'm going to start off with you. I mean, we can go back to slavery, we can go as far back there, but let's talk a little bit more modern history. For you, when people ask, why is Baltimore burning right now, what would be your response if you put this in historical context?
My response would be, let's look at the history of disinvestment. Let's look at the history of segregation. I would ask them to go back to look at the areas that were redlined, right? So as most of this audience probably knows, redlining is when the banks would not give loans to communities that were African American because these communities were considered not worthy of investment. And so they steered home ownership into white communities. So all your black communities, no one could get home ownership because the banks wouldn't provide loans. This started a whole pattern of disinvestment. You had no home ownership. All the home ownership and the money went into white communities. If you look at a red line map from the 30s and you look at the communities today that are disinvested, primarily African American, they're probably something like 70–80% superimposable. I don't know if we can pull up the red line map.
We'll try to get it for our viewers, yeah.
But what you'll see is the same area. Now, the red line map that we would look at is of Baltimore, and it shows West Baltimore, the area of Sandtown, Winchester, one of the areas that were redlined, right? East Baltimore is another high poverty, high crime area, one of the areas that were redlined. There's a whole history going on, project going on now to digitalize all the red line maps across the U.S. To show all the cities that continue to have chronic disinvestment. So I would start with redlining, and then I would continue with urban renewal. Because during urban renewal, we disinvested again. We took communities of low income and African American and brown folks, and we knocked down their buildings, and we moved them not to a better area, but to the next area that was next to be disinvested and demolished. Right?
We'll get a little bit more into that. We actually have a live feed coming out of City Hall. We have Angel Elliott, who's there in front of City Hall talking to protesters out there. Angel?
All right, I'm out here with actually one of the individuals who makes it his job to fight for justice and causes against police brutality, and he actually spoke today on the stage. Tell me why you came out here from Oakland. Why did you take that red eye?
I came here because the demand for justice for Freddie Gray is a righteous one. We've taken one step towards that, but only one step. They did indict the cops, which seldom happens when cops kill a black or Latino person, but I've seen them indict cops before, and then the cops don't get convicted. So that's why I said to the crowd, it's indict, convict, send the killer cops to jail. And I also brought in the whole damn system is guilty as hell, because it's not just the cops who kill, it's the courts who will not prosecute them, it's the media that repeats the lies that cops tell like it's the absolute truth, the politicians who provide them justification. It's the whole system, and we need to build a movement to take that on. That's why I flew the red eye from Oakland, where the dock workers shut down the docks yesterday, May 1st, to say that the green light for killer cops must stop. It's a nationwide movement, and we have to organize it and fight it nationwide. And then lastly, I'm from Baltimore, so I was coming home when I came here to speak at today's protest.
Tell us a little bit more about the them shutting down the docks, because that's a big deal. Anytime you hit the government in the pockets, you know, then they move.
Yeah, what was really significant about that is that you had a workers' organization, a trade union, saying, we're taking this job action not because we want more money or we want better conditions, but because we are tired of seeing our people shot down, choked to death, beaten to death in the streets by those who are sworn to protect and serve. See, and these dock workers had themselves suffered this because several dock workers spoke of having their relatives killed by the police. And they said, we're not going to stand aside and let this go down. We have some power in this society. We can shut these docks down. We can march from the docks to City Hall and say this has to stop. That's an important development in this movement. We need much more of that. People from all different backgrounds saying we will not let this happen to us, but also we won't let it happen to anybody else. Because one of the important things is these are our people, whether you're black, Latino, Asian, white, indigenous, these are your people. You cannot say, well, that's bad, but he's black, I'm white, so it's not my problem. It is your problem if you're a human being.
You know, Baltimore actually has a major port itself, and a large majority of the dock workers are African American.
Yes, they are.
Are the dock workers in Oakland in solidarity with the ones here? And if so, do you think that the dock workers here will mirror the action?
Well, one of the things I raised to the dock workers there is reach out to some of these East Coast dock workers, which they already had done, they told me, because they reached the people in South Carolina to get them involved in the action. And they said, all right, Baltimore, that's next. And here in Baltimore, dock workers have shut the docks down around the freedom struggles in Southern Africa. I know that because I worked on that. So we can get some stuff going out on those docks.
So last question, what do you hope to see for Baltimore in the upcoming weeks and months?
What I want to see is the next steps to justice around Freddie Gray. These indicted cops have to actually be put on trial, and they have to take accountability for the fact that a healthy young man had his spine broken in their custody. You know, and if this had been some individuals doing that, there wouldn't needed to have been several weeks of investigations and grand juries and all of that. They would have just arrested us, put us in jail. The fact that it was cops meant that it had to go slow, but it needs to keep going. And I want to see people stay on the case because this happened because people stood up. They got to keep standing up. And I also want to see Baltimore get organized because it isn't just Freddie Gray. There are many other people that have been killed by the cops here in Baltimore, and it's a nation.
That was Angel Elliott joining us outside of City Hall, having a little bit of technical difficulties. Okay, you should be hearing me fine now. But let's take it in studio here where I have an esteemed panel of only women for the first time. It's nice to see. To my right is Kimberly Ellis. She's a Baltimore resident and community activist. Marisela Gomez, who's a public health scholar, activist, and author. And Shaquayah McKenzie, who's a peace coordinator for Peace by Peace. Thank you, ladies, for joining me.
Thank you.
So Marisela, let's go back to what you were discussing. You brought up the history of redlining, and then you transitioned to something called urban renewal. Just sort of reintroduce that for our viewers.
So urban renewal came about in the late 50s and 60s. This was a government federal funded program that said that the government would give money for basically renewing urban areas. However, the way it was carried out was basically, in the past, it's been called Negro removal. And that's because...
Wait, who called it that?
The general public at that time, and particularly the residents who were being removed. African American people were being removed en masse, and not necessarily to a better place, but just next door where the socioeconomic status was probably no better than the one they were moving out of. But those areas that they were then removed from would then become gentrified. So it was land, possession and dispossession of people for a certain economic status, right? And then we keep going. We had planned shrinkage. We had mass incarceration. So all these things and now what we have today is gentrification. So what we have is a chronic history, a continuous removal of people from their communities, not necessarily into places of better living conditions, but into places that are right there at the edge to become the same under-resourced, underfunded communities. And when you look at communities that have been disinvested, it means disinvested of education, it means disinvested of employment, it means the disinvested of vocational training for youth to have employment, it means disinvestment of recreational places for young people to be able to go and continue to grow their minds, disinvestment of transportation, disinvestment of health resources. And the only type of investment that these communities have consistently had is investment for policing. Now, when you do that, you've created communities that are not ready to compete in society with the other communities that have been continuously invested with those same resources. What we've done is we have a completely unequal playing field. We've grown a gap between those who have and those who have not. And instead of addressing these historic root causes, root shocks of trauma that results from this continuous, what Mindy Fully Loves calls serial forced displacement and disinvestment. We're not looking at those root causes. What we're looking at is how do we contain what we've created in effect. We as a society have created these situations of poverty and unrest. We have created what we are dealing with today. And we all have to take responsibility for this history that have really demonized people of color, particularly African-American people from the time they came to this country against their will. So this is a history, and this is a history that has to be taken apart, unfold, and we have to grapple with it. And the data is there. We got to look at it. We got to look at how this chronic disinvestment brings us to the moment today where a Freddie Gray can be perceived as not worth living, whose life can be disregarded as not worth the life of some other person who comes from a higher income or has a different skin tone. And we can just throw his life away like that.
Kimberly, you just sort of heard Marisela lay out the data, but you lived the history that she's really explaining. And you born and raised in Baltimore. You currently still live in West Baltimore, is that correct?
3 blocks from Penn North.
So describe for us what that was like, experiencing this level of disinvestment in your community.
Well, I remember growing up, I really want to say, I kind of subscribe to the adage of there but for the grace of God. I grew up in West Baltimore, kind of near Walbrook Junction, on a street called Baker Street. Baker Street runs from Hilton Street all the way down past Pennsylvania Avenue.
How many blocks are we talking for those who don't know Baltimore?
Probably, I would say maybe 20 blocks.
20 blocks, okay.
But the significance of where I grew up was I grew up in a house that my grandparents owned. It was maybe a 10-bedroom house. It was one of the only side of Baker Street that had single-family homes. And every other block and even the other side were townhomes. But we had a garden out back. You know, I got raised with my uncles, my mom, like everybody in the house, we had animals. So the reality of me being in that house and being able to look out of the door and see, you know, the lady who was addicted to crack across the street and how her kids got brought up, or, you know, how kids that I went to school with whose parents may be single parents or who worked, and, you know, the freedom that they had and the troubles that come from said freedom when you don't have anybody to be accountable for. Plays a big difference in someone's reality. And so I really agree with what Marisela was saying about when you take resources out of a community and what it does to the community and how it paralyzes a community. And one of the things that I noticed recently was the fact that when we look at our kids and, you know, you immediately want to throw labels and titles, it reminds me of when we first started the war. And we were talking about the number of casualties of Iraqi civilians or Iraqi populations. And, you know, we were saying, you know, there were 100 people killed, and how America was just like, oh my gosh, like, are you serious? And then that word became insurgent. And then people lost that sensibility of, you know, well, I don't know any insurgents, and I really don't know what an insurgent is. So they killed 50 of them this
They're guilty.
Whatever. They're insurgents. And I remember watching the news and how, you know, one of the reporters actually said, so what are we calling them now? Like, what are we back to saying? And you're calling them thugs and you're calling them criminals, but when youth wild out in Kentucky over a basketball game, they're just, you know, reckless kids. And, you know, when our kids do it over something where, you know, people are more upset about the destruction of a building, something that's insured and can be replaced, more so than seeing snuff films, which have become commonplace on social media and on regular TV, where you can see someone be shot in the back and it doesn't impact you, where you can see this young man, for whatever reason, being thrown, you know, on the ground with a knee in his back and him calling for help and no one helping him, and the fear and the paralyzation of people who may want to help, but you're frozen because, you know, if you go into that situation, then you're now a criminal and you have other issues to deal with. It reminds me of slavery times when people, that lynch mob could come to your house and take your kid and there was nothing that you could do. And so when you talk about the redlining and the moving out of people, you know, I blame a lot of that on, you know, the powers that be and the money, but there's also the moral responsibility of us. We left us.
Accountability.
Yeah, we left us. You have a lot of people who, you know, they wanted something better, they moved down to the county, but I want better, and I want better for my city. When I left, I moved to New York for 7 years. When I came home, I bought a house a few blocks from where I grew up.
Okay.
I love my neighborhood. Those kids need to see a nuclear family. They need to see a mom and a dad. They need to see both parents working. We got involved with the community board.
Wow.
So I think that moral component is so important in what we're doing with our kids. But when you talk about the divesting, it's also a moral divesting, because when you have Columbine or you have those issues where you have mass murder in a school or something, the first thing they do is send in mental health people to help those kids deal with and process the emotions that they have. Our kids live in a war zone. If you look at the number of murders in Baltimore City last year, a high proportion of those were in that district, where Freddie Gray was murdered. And so you have to think of, what do these kids see every day? What are they processing? Have they seen their friends or relatives, you know, shot or robbed or mugged or, you know, any type of sudden violence? It impacts you as a person.
Absolutely.
And these kids have nobody's talking to them. Nobody's telling them how to process their emotions, how to, you know, get that out. Even when you're a little baby. I'm blessed to have a granddaughter now. And one of the things that, you know, little kids do is when they're upset, they hit, because they don't know how to process any other emotion. Like, they're upset, so, But you tell that child, this is not what you do. You have to do this. This is what you say. And they learn the proper way to explain how they're feeling, to show it in a nonviolent way. Nobody taught our kids that.
Okay, well, I'm glad you mentioned people sort of, I don't want to say checking out, but in a way it was like, you know, you sort of have made it, you move on to Baltimore County, and there does even, I think even within the Black community, become this section that likes to marginalize certain groups and call them thugs and criminals alongside, you know, I mean, look at our own president, you know, calling them criminals. Look at the mayor calling them thugs. So you do have this sense of trying to distinguish between the good and the bad kids. And I mean, for why do you find that to be so problematic?
I think because people want to disassociate. Once, like, I look at this generation and I'm so in awe of them. Because I look at my parents and grandparents' generation, they were, you know, the We Shall Overcome and, you know, the peaceful march. And then our generation came and we were, you know, like the recipients of that civil rights success, so to speak. So we had a little something to lose, you know, but we wanted people to look at us and be like, we're not like them. And so we had that disassociation in terms of good Blacks and bad Blacks. And so you put on that face, and you left behind those who may not have had what you had, or, you know, somebody didn't pray for them, somebody wasn't able to educate them, and somebody wasn't able to, you know, give them a chance or do whatever. And so that, I'm not like them, I'm a little better, kind of helped us sleep at night. But this generation is really about by any means necessary. And that social media, thank God for cell phones and social media, because it allows them to really look at the content of a person. Like, kids nowadays, like, they're really not into the black and white. They're really into, you know, they have the same interest, or, you know, I like the same music, and they see the person. And that's what we all fought for and wanted. But even in those close-knit of friends, you'll see kids who, like, my son goes to City High School, and I have to tell him, you know, you're still a Black kid. Like, at the end of the day, yeah, because for him, when he goes out, he's just a kid with his friends. And so, if, you know, they want to go hang out in Starbucks or do whatever, they want to go to Barnes and Nobles, which is the hangout place, thank God, for, you know, him and his crew. When someone follows him around, he really doesn't understand it at first until he's like, wait a minute, I just saw you in the other aisle. And then it dawns on him that it still exists. And so eventually, I think everybody has the Black experience where society at some point, be it a police officer or a store owner or, you know, just a common person in a store, makes you realize that you are Black in America. And a lot of people don't realize just the concept of African American is biased in its nature. Like, we're the only race of people who have consistently had to change who we are. We've been Negro, we've been Black, we've been Afro, colored. And so I remember being in grad school and having a feminist class, and one of the women who happened to be white was like, you always talk about it from the Black experience. I mean, from, being an African American, having a Black experience, that's because I am. Like, when you look at me, you're, the Black girl in our class. Like,
Yeah.
And I'm fine with that, don't get me wrong, because that's who I am. But when you call me an African American, it already can say that I'm a subset of America. Yeah. You're a full American. I don't call you a Russian American or a Jewish American or a German American. You're an American, regardless of where you come from. And you had to come from somewhere because the only Native Americans are the Native Americans. But when you look at me, I'm an African American. And so that makes me less than a full American. When my fathers and my uncles served in the military and fought for this country, when I pay my taxes, I run a business, I buy a house, I raise my kids, I do all the things that normal mainstream America does, but you still look at me and you can't find that connection. Which is why it's easy for them to shoot our kids.
Do you feel like, though, there is a portion of the Black community that desperately wants to be accepted by that mainstream?
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. Capitalism sets that up for us.
Definitely.
Yeah, and that's where the numbing part of what you've talked about is that good Negro versus the bad Negro subset. There's an instrumental speech that Tupac gave in his very, very, very early forms of activism where he was professing, you're mad at me because I'm a youth and because I call myself a gangster, but you went off to college and left me here to be taught by the pimps and hoes. So what did you expect me to pick up? You can't get mad at me for receiving in what I see day by day. And I also can't be mad at you because you strive for more. But we have to meet in the middle. We have to understand what happens when we strive for more and leave. We have to understand what that pacification of and that neglect, that numbing is. We have to get to the core of that, because if we don't bridge those two, if we don't bridge that gap, then we're going to continually remain in this good Negro versus bad Negro subset and mindset. So I completely agree with everything you said.
And I couldn't have said it better. I love Tupac too. I think we all love
Always
Tupac.
a Tupac reference in there somewhere.
Yes, thank you for putting one in there. So we're getting word actually out there in the streets that the protests seem to be subsiding a bit. But here at the Real News, well, they're marching to Penn North, I'm hearing from my producer. So we're going to keep tabs on that and give you guys some reports as the protests continue. But ladies, thank you very much for joining me in studio.
Thank you so much.
And we have some footage here of the protests. As you can see, they're marching to Penn North. Hopefully we'll be able to play a package for you all. Just to give our viewers some more context, our reporter Angel Elliott was out there in the streets all day speaking to protesters. Please feel free to tweet us, post things on Facebook. We love to get your questions. We're going to be continuing this conversation with senior editor Paul Jay and Baltimore civil rights attorney A. Dwight Pettit, who will be speaking to us about the curfew which is still on in Baltimore, surprisingly. But as you can see, people are still marching peacefully. It's really been a day of relief, I think, for a lot of folks. So we'll just continue watching this footage. And we have actually a video ready to go of voices from yesterday at Penn North. There was a protest after State's Attorney Marilyn Mosby came out and saying that she was going to be criminally charging the 6 officers involved in the Freddie Gray case. So let's take a look.
I'm Eddie Conway from The Real News, and I just came down to Gilmore Homes to get an assessment of the residents' attitude about the state's attorney's indictments against the 6 officers that killed Freddie Gray. And we're interviewing people and getting an idea of how they felt about it.
Oh, great. It's a start.